Excellent. Well, welcome. It is a beautiful sunny day here, a little cooler than I would like, but hopefully it will warm up soon and we can get outside and not see white everywhere. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I am getting myself acclimated to my controls. There we go. Some of you joined us for the first webinar in this series of Pathways, Programs, and Possibilities, the next guided Pathways frontier in Michigan. So this is the second in a 4-part series, and we'll go over the full series in just a moment. I am joined by my wonderful colleagues, Dr. Eric Oriens, Dr. Jenny Schenker. I'm not sure if Precious Miller is with us, but I'm Katie Girardello, currently serving as the Manager of Network Engagement for the Michigan Center for Student Success. And I'm really excited about the content in today's webinar session and delighted to be bringing some excellent presenters to you all this afternoon for the session. Our agenda is before you today. We do have 2 external presenters. Very pleased that we have Dr. Michelle Van Noy, who is the Associate Director of Education and Employment Research Center at Rutgers School of Management and Labor Relations, as well as Dr. Scott Powell, the Director of the Bureau of Labor Market Info and Strategic Initiatives in the state of Michigan. We also heard he was recently promoted to Chief Data Officer, which is very impressive as far as titles go. So we're pleased to have both of them here today. And then we have 3 colleges that are bravely agreeing to share some of their experience on this topic, as well as we open up for some debrief discussion to close the program today. So that is our plan for this afternoon. Precious is here. Hi, Precious. Sorry, I didn't know if you were joining us. She is here, and I'm glad that you are. Our agenda, here are our presenters. You can see what they look like, and you'll get to see and hear from them in just a few moments. I would like to ask if everyone could please take a look at your participant button. If you click that and find your own name, you'll be able to hover over and see a blue button that says More. And if you click More, you should be able to find the opportunity to rename yourself. Now you can be creative with this, but all we're really asking you to do is add your college acronym or your college name or your organization's name at the end of your name, as we have demonstrated in the slide here. It's very helpful when we're talking with one another or sharing comments via chat if we know where you're coming from. So I see a few of you are figuring that out. I'll give you a moment to figure that out there. And we will be using the chat throughout the program today. Myself and my colleagues will tag team in looking at your comments and questions on chat. It's more likely that we'll save discussion with the presenters toward the end of their particular segments, but if you have questions that are immediate in nature, we will be keeping an eye on that, and we may interrupt them if it feels necessary. Otherwise, we'll hold those questions until each of them has completed their presentation segment, and then we will have time for open discussion and sharing and question asking at the very end of today's program as well. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Erica Oriens, the Executive Director of the Center for Student Success, for the next set of slides.
Thanks, Katie, and good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you here today. I am looking through the participant list, and I see so many friendly names and faces here that I'm not sure that some of my slides will be. I think some of you could probably present some of these slides. And some of you, I've been in multiple Zoom meetings with you already this week. So thank you for joining us today. For those of you who I don't know, we are the Michigan Center for Student Success, and we are part of the Michigan Community College Association. Our focus is really on improving equitable student outcomes and linking with emphasizing linkages between policy, practice, and research. And we're just really excited for this session today, for this to be able to come together and for the whole kind of body of our work. For those of you who don't know us very well, you might recognize us from some of our logos. We've really embraced the Pure Michigan color scheme in the initiatives that we do, but I think most of you have been involved in some of the work that we've been doing over the years. I will point out particularly today how we really see this work as an extension of our guided pathways work and much of the transfer work that we've been doing for many years in the 10-year history of the Center for Student Success. But this is just a sample of some of the initiatives that we have going on. Next slide. So what is this series about? The center, really based on that guided pathways work and that transfer work, we're launching 2 new initiatives that focus on selected humanities and liberal arts programs and workforce programs, where we're interested in taking some of that guided pathways and transfer work and taking a deeper dive into improving pathways to and through our certificate and associate degree programs and even into the bachelor's degree programs. We are grateful for the support from the Ascendium Education Group, which is a philanthropy based in Madison, Wisconsin, and also to the Mellon Foundation for their support of this work. And what we've decided to do is, for the first couple months here in 2021, we are hosting a series of exploratory webinars. Last month, we welcomed the Community College Research Center to join us. They shared with attendees their equity tool that colleges can use to examine access to disaggregated data and access to their programs. Today, we'll be talking about leveraging state and local labor market data to strengthen your programs of study. And then in April, towards the end of April, we will continue that conversation, but really looking more at labor market skills that employers are looking for. And then our last session on May 14th will focus more on how we can promote participation in our programs, partnering with our colleagues at Achieving the Dream, who have led a lot of work nationally around holistic student supports and ensuring that we have equitable access to our programs. So this is our kind of intro to all of these conversations. We will be doing deeper work in all of these areas, but we wanted to spend some time here in the first couple months of 2021, just kind of exploring some of these topics, continuing our conversations with colleges about these various topics. So, you know, why are we doing this? And I think equity is really at the center of a lot of our work. We have partnered with the Voluntary Framework of Accountability for a number of years. And we know that students who were enrolled beginning in fall of 2012, only about 20% of those students earned a certificate or associate degree within 6 years. And we see significant equity gaps, particularly among Black students, where only 7 out of 100, just over 7 out of 100 Black students earned any award. So this is really kind of at the core of a lot of our work. And we see our partnership with faculty and administrators and the programs that you design and the partnerships you build as being a core function of addressing some of those equity and achievement gaps. So what will we be talking about today? This is a webinar that I wanted to host for a long time. I have the pleasure of working periodically with Scott Powell from the Labor Market Information Office. And while I also work closely with other folks in state government to try to access wage, employment, and earnings data for our graduates, one thing I know is that there's a lot of excellent data out there, tools that are available from the state that are helpful to community colleges as you're thinking about designing your programs. And I have heard so frequently from our colleges how you are already thinking about designing and redesigning your programs post-pandemic and what that might look like, the kind of employment available in your communities after the pandemic. We are grateful Scott introduced us to Michelle Van Noy from Rutgers University, who has been doing research on how community colleges use labor market data for many years. And so with that, I will turn it over to Michelle to share her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erica and Katie, for the invitation to speak with you all today and share the work that I've been doing over the years. So just as a brief intro again, I'm at Rutgers at a research center called the Education and Employment Research Center. We study all things related to the education and work transition, but we do a lot of work with community colleges, and we've done that over many years. So if you go to the next slide, Katie, I just want to give you some background on what I want to talk about today, which is really kind of focusing on two topics. So I have a conceptual framework that I worked with some colleagues a few years ago to put together. This is actually how I know Scott. We were at the Hildreth Center at Rutgers years ago. And while I was there, I worked with another colleague, a couple of other folks, to think about the issue of what it means for higher education to align with the labor market. So we kind of built out a conceptual framework, looking at, a review of policy and practice in the literature. And so we have some ideas about what this means at a high level, sort of in terms of how you might think about approaching this idea of using labor market data and what ways you can use it and how you can think about it. And then happily, more recently, my center has been funded by Lumina to do some research kind of building off of that framework to do a scan of what colleges are doing around the country around that use of labor market information. So we're doing case studies right now, and we'll be doing a survey later in the year to try and quantify and build out what we see in practice. So that's kind of that study, that research is at the very early stage. So we're just doing, we've kind of built out the ideas and we're doing preliminary data collection. So, 6 months to a year, I'll have a lot more data to share with you, but we also have, again, sort of built out the framework and ideas around what we expect to find in our work. So I guess the motivation for all of this, I think, which Erica, I think Katie explained pretty well, is just, this all really fits within the context of pathways. That's why we care about this, is that, we're talking about offering programs that have value to students. So, I think that's a major premise of the Guided Pathways movement, and all the, obviously everything I think within colleges is really to try and ensure student success. And, while there's, getting students to complete is certainly a very important metric of college success, I think what most students really care about and are focused on is getting that good job. So does my college education lead me someplace? Does it help me get a career and make a good living? And so, this is all sort of taken already within the context of rising student debt and high, more pressures on college graduates for employment. And now we have the pandemic layered upon that, and all the career transitions and economic uncertainties and that are going along with that. So this idea of making sure that college pathways leave somewhere important. I probably don't need to say this again. I'm sure you're all acutely aware of the importance of this, but I would be remiss if I didn't just state that really important motivation for this work, and the reason why thinking hard about this is really, really important. But I think one of the issues here is just that how do we actually do this is not particularly well understood. So colleges, community colleges, have a long track record of workforce development. So I'm sure this is not anything new to most of you. But I think, how do we actually go about the goals of alignment? What does it mean? How do we think about different stakeholder groups, balancing their needs? What are the different approaches that we might have to alignment? How do we think about all of those things? And what's the link between the actual practices that we do in terms of labor market data and the outcomes we expect to see? So I think those are all questions that we need to begin to ask, to think more clearly about what we want to do, and then how we can actually figure out if what we're doing is working. So I think these are some of the questions that we're trying to look at in our research. And I think some of the questions for everyone to keep in mind as you go on the ground and try and do this work, and review what you're doing and think about how to adjust it as you go. So when we start to think about what is this idea of higher ed labor market alignment, what does it mean for higher education to be aligned with the labor market, we realize that this concept is a big idea, but there's multiple concepts entangled in there. And this may be obvious, but it was a distinction that we felt was important to be clear about, which is that you think about aligning with the labor market. Part of it is getting the numbers right. It's what we call sort of job vacancy alignment. This is, how many jobs are opening up, in what industries and what occupations. What are the numbers? Do you have a small need, a small demand, a large demand? How is it changing and shifting over time? So that gives you a sense of the volume and the kinds of programs you need. And then there's the issue of the skills alignment. So once you know what program you need, what do you actually need to teach it? What are the actual skills that you want to convey, the competencies that you want to ensure your students have? And so, I mean, obviously, as you're doing this work, these are intertwined concepts, but they are actually kind of different things that you want to track, and that there also are some different kinds of data and different approaches to doing each of these. And so it's important to kind of be clear about what you're doing when you're thinking about using data and using data. And so another kind of observation about thinking about aligning with the labor market, and I think you know, colleges are in a really interesting position here as sort of an intermediary, where you're really kind of tasked in some sense with balancing the needs of students with the needs of employers, your own institutional needs and priorities, the labor market, the broader labor market, so not just one individual employer, but the whole region possibly, right? So even thinking about it from an economic development standpoint. And then you have policymakers and funders. And I guess the bottom line point to think about here is that it's also important to sort of be mindful about whose interests are you favoring here, and how can you at least be aware of the interests that you're balancing. So students, for example, have longer term goals in mind oftentimes than an employer who might be coming for you looking for students or talking to you about skill needs. And so as you're thinking about, you know, how do you adjust your skills, I'm sure this is an issue that people have tangled with before, but it's one of those things I think to be clearly mindful of, that, you know, you're balancing these sort of immediate needs of the employers with the broader needs of the students. You have funding pressures that are pulling you in certain directions. And then, you know, one individual employer may not speak for your whole labor market. And I'm sure many of you are engaged in sort of broader kind of economic development conversations. And so I think at the end of the day, what this means is that there's not sort of one size fits all approach. There's not one thing that's going to work. And, you know, being mindful of these different stakeholders is important in coming to a balance, and that there's kind of a continuum of different activities. We also can see here, just to add more complexity to it as you're thinking about your work, is that labor market alignment can happen at multiple levels. So it's not just the college is doing it or the program is doing it. We can do this at many, many levels, which I think goes to the point about thinking about where this can fit within your institution. Where can you do this? So, and I think that our sense is that in order to really effectively have higher ed be engaged with the labor market, you got to be thinking about this at multiple levels in order to work towards sort of systematic change. So, you know, at the smallest, most granular level, you're thinking about a class. Is the content of the class aligned with the skill needs that we're intending it to be to prepare students for? You know, is it part of a program that meets industry needs, that balances students' long-term career and educational goals? You know, in terms of, you know, is your department offering a mix of programs and classes that are aligned with, again, student needs and labor market needs, employer needs? You might look at it as an institution. How do we sit within the entire field, within our entire region, in terms of our mix of programs? Again, are they meeting the regional needs? And then, you know, in places where there's more of a system, there's also that issue of thinking about it at that level. So, and I think that, you know, at different levels here, you know, we think we can think about using different kinds of data, but the point is that every actor at every point can think about labor market data. A faculty member designing a class or a program can think about it. You know, a dean can think about it, a provost can think about it, the president can think about it, IR can think about it. Many, many people can think about it at these different levels. So again, just you know, another sort of broad concept to keep in mind. And then, you know, again, sort of thinking about this very holistically, alignment can happen at many different points, you know, within a program, you know, different aspects of it, right? So it's not just the curriculum. Certainly that's one piece. We're thinking about skill needs, right? But it's also thinking about, you know, how do you have support services and work-based learning, if that's, you know, something that can really enhance the program. Can the mode of learning be more aligned with the needs that students and employers will have in terms of competency-based learning? How do you recruit students to enroll in the program and select the kinds of programs? So it's something that you think about throughout the entire sort of process and phase of a program. It really can influence many different points, many different factors that exist within a program. So it's sort of not just a one and done kind of thing. That's something that you can think about in many aspects of what you do and integrate it throughout. And so as we sort of tried to bring all of these ideas together, we kind of came up with this one picture you'll see in a moment, which is very big and a lot of moving parts on it. But I think the three kind of key ideas to keep in mind with this is that go back. There's really kind of three core activities that we see as sort of being important to promote alignment. One is just this idea of collecting and validating information on employer needs. So this is gathering up all the data in your environment. We'll talk about, what kinds of data sources are there, and Scott will get into much more detail on that and provide some very useful resources. But it's one thing to have the data. The next part is possibly the harder part, maybe. Well, I mean, it's all interesting and challenging, but now you've got the data. How do you incorporate it into your program operations, into all these different phases of your program? What do you do with it? How do you make it useful to different people in different parts of your program? And one of the other things that I think we also realized with all of this is that there's a very important sort of relationship building component to all of this when you think about incorporating data and kind of keeping that flow of information ongoing. So now we can go to the big picture, the big overwhelming picture here. And this, I think, is just trying to bring this all together, that we have, on the left, a whole bunch of different stakeholders with different needs and factors around what they're looking for in their context. Employers, students, institutions, policymakers, the labor market as a whole. All of that sort of feeds into what we might do here in terms of labor market alignment and gathering data. It all exists within this big funding context. We have data available. We can do data collection efforts. They all kind of contribute into this sort of idea of incorporating data and building relationships across each of the components of a program that we talked about, sort of selecting your program, enrolling students, figuring out what the content is, what competencies people need to have, figuring out the best instructional strategies that are really going to convey that material to students, figuring out if you need work-based learning and what kind of work-based learning you can incorporate, and then thinking about how to advise students about these options and provide proper supports for them to make the transition to employment and to make those linkages for themselves. And then all those things ultimately feed into those two different goals we talked about of job vacancy alignment and skills alignment. So we can go. And so I think, again, we're trying to think about those outcomes of job vacancy, looking at the numbers of jobs, and skills alignment. Do we have the right competencies? And there's different measures that we might get into to look at those outcomes. Some examples might be, are students attaining credentials with labor market value? That gets us to the skills piece. We might want to look at the numbers of graduates compared to job openings to see, are we kind of hitting our targets with job vacancy alignment? Interesting, wage data gives us great information about earnings and employment. That's another kind of piece that gets at both of these. Direct assessments with employers to get that kind of feedback, and real-time jobs data really helps with this. I saw the question in the chat that came up about duplicative programs. That's a really important and interesting question here, and that goes to the question, I guess, about really about your program planning, your program selection piece. And so your data can help guide you, on where you have programs that are overlapping within your college, across colleges. I know these are hard conversations. And I think that's kind of, where you can gather up the data, and then that's where the tricky questions come in about the relationship building and how you incorporate this data. Is now that you have that, what do you do with it, and how do you make the case with it? But I think having the data is certainly the first step to say, hey, here are the trade-offs. We have these duplicative programs. Maybe you couch it in the broader context of the college to say, well, we have duplicative programs, and we also have this other documented need for a program that we're not offering. And now you have a case on the table about, some trade-offs here about what you're doing that could provoke some interesting conversations and decisions, but you have the data there to do that, to guide your conversations. And that's really the foundational piece about why this is important and how you can use it. How you have those conversations and how you make that internal case, I would love to hear that from you guys, because I think that's where it does get difficult. And I don't claim at this point to know all the right answers there, but I think those are definitely important questions to get at. Okay. So yeah, I think some of these things too are things that that take time. So what's the time horizon? And that's where it gets tricky also with the program planning, is how far ahead can you project? And so you may know a program that's gone, that needs to be phased out.
a new program, how do you know which, you know, at what point you want to add a new program? Sometimes you have new emerging industries. At what point do you know that it's solid to start adding in, you know, the programs? So, you know, and that's where kind of collecting enough data from different sources can help with following those kinds of trends. So we can go to the next piece. So, you know, so I think that that's where we get to, you know, I think thinking about all the different uses of data. And so this is kind of drawing from some of the newer work that we're doing. I think that we, you know, we're starting to, we've done a scan of some colleges and what they're doing and some interviews. And so I think we're getting at building out, I think, some of the ways that we're seeing this more and more with schools in terms of the use of data around job vacancy alignment. So we see people doing, institutions doing advising with their alums, reaching out to alums and doing career advising, and also with their current students. So again, trying to, you know, match people to opportunities and think about what's coming up. A lot of it, you know, using the data to kind of figure out which employers to reach out to engage with. It's wonderful to see this within the context of guided pathways here in Michigan, because I think, you know, that's one of the things we've also seen that in some other states too. I know California's done a lot of work in that area, and other states is really thinking hard about, I mean, that's the premise of guided pathways, is that, you know, start with the end in mind. I know Davis always says that, start with the end in mind, and right, this is kind of your end, is like getting students to good jobs. So, you know, it's front and center. And the equity issues around this too is also really important, thinking about what jobs we're leading to and for which students, and all of those questions, you know, come in here in terms of job vacancy. You know, the new program development, again, I spoke a little bit about that. We see a lot of colleges using these data in program reviews, you know, very important there, clearly, and ongoing processes. And then in terms of figuring out which programs to add and how to, and, you know, how many slots to add in terms of enrolling students, and thinking very strategically. You know, I think that, you know, the question about what to do about programs, really important, you know. So I don't know if we want, I mean, we can, I guess maybe we should continue going through the slides and we'll stop for discussion after this. Just got a few more. But so, I mean, and then the other uses of data we've seen that fall more under the skill alignment, thinking about aligning with competencies. You know, again, we think about how important it is with new programs to make sure that they're matched with the right skills and competencies. And then also obviously for ongoing programs to continually be updating that through these data. And then sort of mapping out skills and building up from what we see in the data, and informing instructional strategies, work-based learning, all the kinds of things that I went through before. So this is where it starts to get interesting, is thinking about the sources of data, which I'm, you know, sort of going to phase into, you know, as I said, Scott will get into all of the interesting sources and resources that are available to you all, but just to kind of give you a big high-level picture of what we're talking about. And I think really from the research that we've done is to see that there's many kinds of data. Many of them have different trade-offs, right? There's pluses and minuses of each of them, and probably the strongest thing to do is to use multiple sources of data. So, I mean, as a researcher, I can tell you within anything, right? I'm sure you all, you know, can appreciate this, is that, you know, you want to triangulate data. You don't want to just rely exclusively on one piece of information. You want multiple sources of information that can tell you different things. Real-time jobs data, you know, I'm sure you're all aware of Burning Glass and MC, Shimura, JobsEQ is another actor that's gotten involved in that work as well. And so there's a lot of information based on, you know, these companies sort of culling the web and pulling out job postings and deduplicating them and coding them and helping to track in a real-time way job posting trends, job opportunities, skills requirements, credential requirements. So it's a very interesting and informative source of data. You know, I think, you know, people have sort of pointed out the limitations. It may not always provide all of the information across all industries and all occupations. You know, it's really, you have to remember that you're looking at job postings. So, you know, what a job posting tells you is not always what an employer will actually do. It's what they're saying. It's not what they're actually doing. You know, so there are some limitations. And I think someone just pointed out they're also not always really accessible, because these certainly have a cost. And so they're all for-profit organizations. I think they're all at least for-profit. There's certainly a cost involved in all of them. I won't talk about the for-profit status, but for colleges, there's all a cost involved in using those data. So that is certainly, you know, something to grapple with in terms of the accessibility. We do know there's lots of, go back. There's lots of other data sources from the state and federal data, from surveys and other information. And I'm sure Scott will get into more detail on all of those sources. We know that states have gotten much more into linking with wage records data. So again, something else more to talk about, but that's a wonderful source of information to look at your students and their actual outcomes in terms of their earnings on the job. And yes, the comment here is great. It's qualitative data. That's our next point exactly, like surveys and interviews with industry, talking to your employers, right? So that's, talking directly to people. Now, this is where sometimes it gets tricky. If you don't have multiple sources of data and you rely only on the couple of employers that talk to you all the time, you might not have the broadest view. On the other hand, if you only rely on job posting data, you're also not going to have real on the ground job trends, and you also won't have the chance to build relationships with employers. And so I think from the research that we've done, we see the real value in those more direct engagements with employers, because not only do you get information, but you also get relationships, and talking to employers will help draw them in terms of other things that you do. If you want them to do work-based learning activities, asking them what skills are important will let them know that you care, and they will invite you in to do other things. So I feel like probably many of you have thought about these things, but I think they're important to recognize. So anyway, so these are just some of the other data, the types of data. Sources, you can see the vendors, state offices like Scott, college systems, and your own in-house data collection. So many, many sources of data. One other point that I think is really important to think about is that as you're building out the use of your data, is a lot of times what we see in colleges is there's like one champion, one person who's really excited about using the data. And it takes some time to build out systems to make sure that it's fully integrated into the operations of the college. So that it's not something that when that champion goes away, it's just going to fall away because, the person who really cared about it's no longer there, right? But to make it part of the ongoing processes. So maybe have an office that's responsible for it, have it being integrated into the operations of committees, having trainings on it so that more people within the college become aware of how to use the data, what the data are, what's available, how do you get it, having tools that make it accessible for people to use, dashboards, things like that. So I think that's probably one of the most important things to think about. Once you have the data, how do you get people to use it? So how do you actually incorporate it into the practices at your college so that it can be used at multiple levels by multiple people across multiple program activities? So really thinking holistically about how you can integrate it is really important, and how you could find institutional structures within your college that will promote that use and give it a life of its own, so it goes beyond just one person or a couple of advocates. So that's it. I think, in summary, I think we recognize there's lots of different approaches. So I want you to take away the idea that a lot of this will depend on what you see as being needs and ways that this data can really improve what you're doing. If you think about it holistically, you'll come up possibly with different ways that each college can use it. So it's a little bit of art and science. It's kind of figuring out what works and what's most important for your needs. And then, I think that this sort of dialogue among stakeholders is really important as you think about balancing them. And again, as I just said, it's sort of thinking about how to integrate that data into your operations is really, really important to promote sustainability of these data and their use. So I think that's all I have in terms of my comments. You can certainly reach out to me for more information. Check back in like I said, in 6 months and we'll have more, 6 months or a year, we'll have more information from this project that will be feeding out to the field. And thanks so much for the chance to share with you. And I really look forward to your thoughts, questions, feedback, and the discussion that we have today.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I did put a note in the chat. We're happy to take questions, comments. We have a couple of minutes with Michelle here before we move into Scott's remarks. If anyone has questions or comments they would like to pose, feel free. It looks like here's one. Do any colleges have examples of how they share LMI and other data and promote use across their campus? I'm happy to let Michelle answer that. We do have 3 colleges who will be sharing some of their own processes at the end of our presentation today. So we'll be hearing from at least 3 institutions at that time. But Michelle, I don't know if there's anything you want to add from what you've seen.
Yeah, I think that, some of the examples that we have just in terms of, integrating it into committee use, promoting more faculty engagement with it, doing trainings for faculty and administrators on the kind of data and how to use it, are some of the things we've seen. I think there's a lot of different ways it can be used. I should also acknowledge Victoria Cody from our research team is on the call today, and Victoria's been also doing a lot of these interviews. So I don't know if Victoria wants to jump in with anything that she's seen in her work so far. But we're really gathering up a lot of those, and we'd love to hear from you all too if you have other examples of ways that it's been useful.
I'm not hearing or seeing Victoria popping in. And we will have lots of time for, well, I don't know about lots of time, but we will have some time for sharing at the end too. If other folks want to discuss, think about what you might want to share with your colleagues.
I'm just putting Victoria on the spot. There's no need to jump in, but
Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge her great work on moving this forward. So yeah, I think that's a really important question, is really to think about how we you know, I've seen some colleges have LMI shops, exactly where within the college they like that's sort of a separate office where there's an office that's sort of generating that information, and you know, that can happen as part of IR, but in some places we've seen it sort of be kind of a separate function. You know, it kind of can take on a life of its own in some ways. It is fairly different from what a lot of IR offices typically do. I don't know which is the better strategy, but those are some of the things that we've seen.
Thank you. Another question came in related to publications that might be available as colleges are looking to build out their systems for labor market alignment. Do you have any suggestions for publications that folks could look at? I know I read something that you co-authored, Michelle, that was really great, and we can certainly make that available to folks.
Yeah, you know, we have a short issue brief that we did from this framework that I talked about that might be helpful. I mean, it's a condensed version. There's a very long book chapter that we did, which might be more than folks want to wade through, but I can send a link for that. And I can also send the link for the shorter issue brief that kind of summarizes that. And you know, there have been other pieces. I have to go back and look at, you know, there was a lot of work early on when the job posting data became sort of more available, and we haven't seen as much with looking at the real-time jobs data. And I think there's a lot more interest in that recently, in terms of what's out there. But I'll take a look and see if there's any resources. I'll follow up with you later and send you some other publications, including the ones I mentioned that we did, and that you can send around to people for resources later.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other questions? I see a comment about how important LMI data can be when you're writing grant proposals, and I agree with that, and we may hear about that as well from some of our college sharing partners later.
Yes, and in fact, I don't think that showed up in my list, but that actually has been coming up in our data collection. I don't, for some reason, I don't think that made my slide, but that is definitely something we've been hearing a bunch. And so it really shows the wide range of functions that these data can have in terms of supporting operations. You know, it's interesting, even recruiting students, that's sort of one that we've heard of, you know, is just sort of helping students to know what the outcomes they can expect are. That's something that has been more recently, colleges are talking about doing that more, you know, thinking about it in the advising function that way.
Certainly, and a comment that I kind of glossed over from a little while ago in the presentation regarding both using quantitative data that's available from all of the wonderful sources that Michelle has provided an overview on, but also having relationships, which I appreciate that you interwove that in your system, and those relationships can lead to great qualitative data from employer partnerships, alumnus, and so on. So all of that data can be useful both for program planning, grant proposals, et cetera.
And the point you just made about alums is actually interesting, because when you think about reaching out to employers, I don't know if everyone automatically thinks about their alumni pool, but it seems that that's a potentially very fertile group of people to reach out to, since they presumably will have very positive feelings about the college and want to help other students, you know, 10 years down the road or whatever. So in terms of thinking about employers, you know, that actually came through from some of the other employer research I've done, is that when you find an employer who has attended a community college or even the local community college, they often are the champions, you know, for helping the college and helping students.
Excellent. Well, I will thank you again. This is a wonderful presentation and lead in to what we're going to hear from Dr. Powell next. And I'm going to stop sharing because I know he's going to go ahead and screen share for his version or his part of the presentation. So I'll give him a moment to get acclimated there, and we'll invite Dr. Powell to take the stage. This is always that moment where you're terrified as a facilitator. Are they out there? Here he is. Perfect. Excellent. Okay. Thank you so much, Michelle, and Scott, take it away.
You.
Sorry, my mute button went away. All right, I found it. Okay, so it's been about 6 years since Michelle and I worked together, but this has been a very strong reminder of why you don't want to follow Michelle when doing your presentation, because hers are so strong. But it's really a treat to get to do this with Michelle after so many years, and it's great to see everybody here. Some of you I know from my work here in the state over the last 6 years. A lot of you I don't. So for all these that don't know me, I'm the director of the Bureau of Labor Market Information and Strategic Initiatives with the state. And we are the official source for labor market and demographic information for the state of Michigan. And in addition to producing a lot of data, many of those types of data that Michelle just covered, we also produce a lot of research, analysis, and tools and other resources for all of you to help in your work. So what I want to do today is try to cover as much ground as I can. I probably added too many slides because as Erica was talking in the beginning about equity, I'm like, oh, I've got a couple of things I could add on that. So it's usually not a good idea to add slides during the webinar, but we'll see how it goes. But I'll try to get through as much of this as I can. My hope is to share with you all the resources we have available within my bureau for all of you, but also some tools as well. And I'll demo those if we have some time. So really quick before we jump into those resources though, I thought, it'd be remiss given the work of my bureau and the situation we're in, if I didn't just take a couple minutes to really kind of just, I think, flesh out and shine light on the importance of the work that you all do. It's been a really tough year. We all know that, right? We're coming up on pretty much a year exactly for, since a lot of us have been, affected by this. And so, just really quick, I want to give you a few labor market points here. So you can see what's in front of you. This is the unemployment rate for both the state and the US over basically all of 2020. You can see, and then the gray bars are unemployment insurance claims. You can see that obviously things spiked at the peak of the pandemic back in April. Things came down pretty quickly after that. And then we've kind of been on a slow decline, relatively level since then with the unemployment rate, but we're still not where we were before this all started. The unemployment rate's about double what it was before the pandemic hit. We also know, as many of you have heard time and again, that this situation has not affected everyone equally. So you can see that now, if we look at unemployment rates for men and women, they're pretty similar. But if you look at labor force changes, you can see that women have been hit much harder in the state of Michigan than men have since the beginning of the pandemic. We actually have a report coming out later this month on women in the Michigan workforce, if anyone's interested. So that'll be coming out on March 24th. But we know that women have been affected more by this than men. We also know that people of color have been affected in a much stronger way than other groups. So, and these are, if you're wondering what slides I added at the last second, these are the ones. But you can see that, obviously equity has a huge component here. So, if we look at the jobless rates over the course of 2020 as a whole, we can see that it's, a little over 8% for whites, it's over 19% for blacks, and over 12% for Hispanics. And if we look at, the average duration of someone's spell of unemployment, we can also see that those are longer for people of color. So I just want to take a minute and say, this is what the pandemic has done. We know this is has not been equitable in how it's affected people. But the good news is, what can you do to help people? One of the biggest things we can absolutely do is educational attainment. That's why we have an educational attainment goal in the state now. And this is where it obviously relates directly to the work that everybody in this webinar is doing, is the focus on post-secondary education. So you can see on your left of the screen here, unemployment rates highly correlated with educational attainment, right? And then you can see labor force participation as well, right? So more education somebody has, lower their unemployment rate, higher their participation in the labor market. So, and not only that, right, but we know that this plays a big role with wages. We know that the more education we get individuals, the higher their wages, the greater their prosperity. So before launching into all the resources and the data we have available, again, I just wanted to just take a minute and applaud all of you for the work that you do, and just reemphasize just how important it is that we're out there working on post-secondary education to help people of our state. So with that, I'll go ahead and move into what kind of data we produce. So some of you are very familiar with our data, I know. I think I saw Mark on the call, so I know he's very familiar with things that we do. But one of the biggest things we do is our employment projections. So every 2 years, we put out some employment projections for the state. That's on even numbered years, so we put those out last summer. This summer, we'll have regional projections. So for each of the 10 prosperity regions. And so what do we do with those? Basically, we look at all of our industries, we look at all of our occupations, and we come up with projected growth rates as well as annual openings, stuff that we're going to cover here in a minute. Top line, what we have for the state right now, our most recent projections go through 2028. we have a labor market growing essentially flat, right? There's almost no growth. And that is a largely demographic story. So without some kind of either domestic or international migration, right, we just don't have the individuals in the state to grow much more than that, right? So that being said, even with that limitation on growth, we still have 500,000 job openings every year in the state, right? So there's a lot of job openings that are still available, and we'll get into that in a little more detail right now. So if we break those job openings down by the types of education and training that they require, you can see that the growth rates vary quite a bit. And just like we saw a little bit ago when it came to unemployment or it came to wages, it's also the case that the more education a job requires, more education or training a job requires, the higher the growth rate, with a small exception there between for some of our certificate and moderate term training programs. But you can see the highest growth rates are for those that require jobs that require an associate degree or training of more than a year or an apprenticeship or bachelor's degrees or higher. So this clearly has a strong connection between growth rates and educational attainment. And we can also see that there's a relationship as well. Now, it doesn't hold the same way, though, when it comes to openings. So all labor markets kind of have a base requirement of jobs with some basic skill requirements. And that's why you'll see the biggest group as far as openings go, almost half of those 500,000 openings belong to jobs that require high school diploma, followed by those jobs that require a post-secondary certificate or some moderate term training and then bachelor's degree followed by associates. So, but these are examples of the kinds of information we produce as well. So, so a couple of things, right, is the relationship with educational attainment here, but also these examples of how we can use things like growth rates or occupations, things like annual openings that we project. So we produce that information and a bunch of other things like wages, but what do we do with it? And because a lot of times, so some of you love that raw data, and I'll show you a little bit later how you can get that right off our website. That's all publicly available. But I think for a lot of individuals, it's helpful if we can take that data and turn it into something that's a little more immediately actionable for all of you. And so that's why we produce a few different products. So I think a lot of you are familiar with probably Michigan's Hot 50. So that's the top 50 jobs for the state. And we produce that list every time we do new projections. So this came out last summer, and we'll do another one in the summer of 2028. Excuse me, I forgot what year it is, 2022. Too many numbers. We also do a career outlook that you'll see out that breaks these jobs down by, again, these education and training requirements. These two products are statewide. We also do a career outlook for each of the 10 prosperity regions, and the new versions of those will come out this summer. So, but let me dive into a little more detail on what these lists entail. So what we do, we come up with here's our top jobs for the state. We look at a number of things, and again, this is all data that's absolutely available on our website. We look at annual openings, but 3 different types of annual openings. Exit openings, so those are people that are leaving the labor market. So think of those as maybe retirements, for instance. We look at transfer openings, and so those are going to be people changing occupations. So maybe they're going from, let's say, more applied occupation to a management occupation, those types of things. And then we have change openings or growth openings. So if a job is growing, but openings being key here, right? Because the number one thing is for somebody to get it, there needs to be a job there. So there's a reason that we give so much weight to those openings. We also look at growth rates for those jobs, and we look at how much they pay. We look at what the median wage is for that occupation across the state. Other things we do, and this is something that you could do, is you put together a list like this for yourself if you wanted to. We look at what the education and training requirements are. If it doesn't require something beyond high school, it's not on these lists. We have a wage floor. If it doesn't pay what the median wage is for the state, it doesn't make the list. So right now, I believe it's $18.60 an hour, or about $38,000 a year. So that's the median wage for all occupations. So if it doesn't pay at least that much, it's not going to be on this list. And we also have a base employment, right? So a job's got to be so big otherwise, because if it's too small, right, then it just takes a little bit of growth to have a crazy growth number. And we don't want that to drive up, change the rankings unnecessarily. So we look at that as well. The job has to have, at least 1,000, jobs in the state to make the list, which sounds big, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not. So that's how we create these lists. Once we produce it, so here's an example of what it looks like. This is the first half of it, of course, just an alphabetized list. But again, so this is the top 50 jobs for the state. What the product does, though, is it provides, this is an example of everything that's available to you if you want it. So there's the occupation title on the left. Next to that, it's those projected annual openings. Next to that is the wage range, followed by the growth rate. So all those things that go into determining a job's ranking. And then off on the right, we have the typical education and training beyond high school for the job. So again, this is examples of not only a list that we produce that's out there if you want to use it, but the types of data that goes into creating this is also available. Some quick highlights of the Hot 50. 38 of these jobs require a bachelor's degree or higher. 12 require something beyond high school, but less than a bachelor's degree. 7 skilled trades occupations on here, 7 STEM occupations on here. So a lot of variation in the types of occupations that are on the list. 38 occupations in the previous Hot 50, and I think this is the 4th one of these I've done since I've been with the state. That's a pretty stable number. So I think what I would want you to take away from that is just there's not high turnover in this list when we do it from one year to the next. The other thing, I guess, that I would want you to take away with a list like this, and again, I know a lot of you have seen this before, but something that I always want to make sure that I share when we talk about a product like this is Job 51 is still a really good job. Just because it's not on this list or one of our lists does not mean it's not a good job. So sometimes when I hear a parent say, hey, I took your Hot 50 and I took it home and I handed it to my kid and I said, hey, pick one. I'm like, no, that's not what it's for. It's supposed to start a conversation. It's a good list to start with, but there's lots of good opportunities out there. So that's why that next 50 column, you can see lots of great jobs, and there are 51 through 100. When we did the most recent list, we already had elementary school teachers on there. We added middle and high school teachers, so now all K-12 teachers are basically on the list, as well as education administrators. So a good public service drive there in the list, but also more skilled trades with machinists and operating engineers and logisticians, which we created the list before everything hit, but we know logisticians have been having quite the year. So just some quick hits there. The other product that's a really big one is going to be our Career Outlook. So think of this as a bunch of little Hot 50s, but it's 20 instead of 50. All right. So we break it up by education and training requirements. So you can see on your left, okay, these are jobs that require is up to a year, somewhere between 3 months to 12 months of training or a post-secondary certificate. Next to that is jobs that require an associate degree or long-term training or apprenticeship. Next to that is bachelor's degree occupations. And this is the top 20 jobs in each of those categories for the state using the exact same methodology. Again, it's just a different way of cutting this stuff up. But again, it also shows you the types of data we have available, how we use it, how you could use it as well if you wanted to. Only other thing I would add, so on the back side of this, we've got a STEM list as well if you're interested. And then you'll notice that on the left, that says high demand, but it doesn't say high wage, and there's a reason for that. So that's the tier that requires the lowest level of education and training. And if we don't use that wage floor I was talking about, that cutoff at $18.60, because if we did that for that particular group, it would be nothing but supervisors. And we want to make sure there's lots of good entry-level occupations on that list as well, especially for our workforce development partners. So that is that. And then I think some other resources I want you to, and I'm going to jump to a live demo here of our website in just a second. But really quick before that, you heard Michelle talk about job ads. She was, inside my brain as she was talking about how job ads and job openings are not the same thing. Absolutely correct. We take the same approach, so keep in mind these are ads, but we have a job ad dashboard dashboard for each of the 10 regions of Michigan. It's updated monthly. This is on our website. I'll show you how to access it in just a minute. But you can find this information on our website if you're curious about right now what a job ads look like in your area, how are they trending, things like that. And I think, you know, for many of you, I'm not telling you anything you haven't seen before when it comes to Pathfinder, and I'll demonstrate that tool in just a minute. But basically what this is it provides information on all these occupations I was just showing you, but also tells you if you're interested in an occupation, what kind of institution could you go to pursue that occupation, and what kind of employment outcomes do we see for those individuals. So before I jump to that, just letting everybody know, Gov Delivery Service, if you want to keep up to date on the stuff that we have, I can show you on the website as well. You know, I'll just jump. Let's do that right now. Give me 1 second. And I will share another screen so we can, sorry, you can start to panic now, Katie.
I've been slowly panicking the whole time. It's fine.
Give me 1 second. Sorry about this.
And just in case anyone's not following the chat, it was asked whether we would be posting the slides. And yes, we are posting the slides and the recording from today's session. I popped the link into the chat, but you can find it at mcca.org by clicking events. And after the fact, you'll look for an archived event from today's date.
Okay, so just a few things on our website. So it's you can go to michigan.gov/LMI or milmi.org. It'll take you to the same place. So this is our homepage. You can see, you know, some basic labor market information, unemployment rates, of course, over the year, like you just saw. Information by a lot of our metropolitan statistical areas. If you go down to the bottom here under publications, you'll see Prosperity Region Job Demand Snapshots. If I click that, so this was actually just updated yesterday with February data. Go ahead and click My Home, Region 6. So if we look here, again, you can see here's the top employers posting ads in Region 6. You can scroll through those. Top occupations, you can scroll through those. You can look at how ads have changed over the course of the last couple of years, what the typical education requirements are for the ads, how that's distributed, these particular areas, right? You can see that most ads are in Flint, no surprise there. Anyway, so this is available for all 10 regions. So that's one resource we have. The data that we use, the data that we produce, it's if you go to data tools and data search, you'll see everything listed over here on the side. So that's how you access all. If you're somebody who likes the raw data, you want to work with the raw data, whether it's projections data, whether it's wage data, unemployment data, any of that stuff, that's all in here in our data search tool section. If you go to publications and then research, so we have a monthly publication called Labor Market News. If you're interested, that's right here. But if you go to research, you can see here's our Hot 50. Here's our career outlook for the state. It's been a little bit, about 18 months, so we got to go to the next little bit here. But you can see right here is regional career outlooks. So if you want one of those regional career outlooks for your part of the state, again, those will be updated this summer. So we'll have those coming out later this summer for 2028 projections in the regions. Yeah, as well as everything else we do, right? So you can see we have these planning information and workforce reports that we do every 2 years. We've got some cluster analysis, so lots of stuff in here. Registered apprenticeship. I think there's plenty here. If you're not familiar with it, please take a look. Hopefully you find something that you like or that's useful to you. And then up here in this rotator at the top of our site, sorry, I've got to move my Zoom windows around. Oh, there it goes. So Gov Delivery right here. If you want to just keep up to date on everything we do, you can just go there, sign up for everything, pick and choose what you want. You don't have to, you don't have to get everything if you don't want it. So that's the site. And then I know I'm getting a little close on time, Katie, I apologize, but maybe I can just do 1 or 2 examples real quick on Pathfinder. So let me So you can kind of pick your role. This is actually undergoing a revamp right now. You'll see a facelift for Pathfinder coming later in the year. But for now, right, this is the main page you need to get to. And you can start with an occupation or a field of study or a school or a location. You can grab one of our Hot 50 careers. You can start there. You can also look at professional trades. So let's just choose an occupation. I think, so web developer, if you go back and look at our career outlook and look at, in the associate degree column, web developer is on there. So first thing you can do is just select web developer, and you can see this is how web developer performs on a number of metrics from our data. So you can see these are all percentiles, right? So think of these as rankings. Obviously strong pay for web developers, openings not quite as strong, but still strong, very strong in growth. Tells you how much it pays, what the wage range is for that job, and it gives you specifically all that data that we just looked at. If we go to choose a field of study, you can see it's not listing every zip code under the sun. It's only doing those ones that crosswalk to the occupation. So we can hit computer programming, choose school, and that is my local community college. So I'll be selfish and select LCC. And then if we go down here and click on associate degree, you can see there's a lot of stuff that pops up. So what you've seen so far is all publicly available. What's different about what you're seeing now is, so you also heard Michelle talk about wage records. I know for most people in this group, or a lot of people in this group, I'm not telling you anything you don't know about. But what you're seeing is actual employment outcomes for the students that went through computer programming associate degree at LCC. So 1 year after they completed that program, we can see that 1% went on to get something beyond an associate degree. Another 25% are enrolled in post-secondary education. You can see that 44% are employed in Michigan. For those that are employed, they're making almost $46,000 annually. In that 1 year after, by the time it's 5 years after, they're making over $65,000 annually. So these are the employment outcomes for individuals in this program. And again, right, this is not survey-based. This is based off of linking education records with wage records and aggregating that output. So that is and then you can also go here and get some out, summarize everything together if you want to click on View My Career Roadmap. But so that's an example of what web developer would look like. We could do this for other occupations if you're interested, but I think.
Scott, there are a couple questions in the chat,
Sure.
If you don't mind my posing them to you. And then we are texting amongst ourselves about how much we're enjoying this and how much great information is being shared. So thank you so much. So one question Erica posed was about the negative growth percentage. If you could clarify that. That was a little while ago that you discussed that, but if you could clarify that.
Yeah, so I guess if overall for the state, Erica, is that you're referring to, or for the
Yeah, it was
job?
on the smaller charts that you do by associate degree and bachelor's degree, and it in some cases it said growth and it was negative.
Got it.
And I wondered, how does it get on the list if there is no projected growth?
That's a great question. So there can still be, so it might be the case. So let's say a job, maybe like, let's say right now this is just an example. I'm pulling out of thin air. Let's say there's 5,000 web developers in Michigan right now, and we're projecting that it'll be 4,000 10 years from now. That would give them a pretty big negative growth rate. But it also might be the case that for some reason, 3,000 of them are retiring in the next 5 years, right? So that means there's still a lot of openings. So that even if a job is shrinking as far as how many there are, if there's still a lot of openings and it still pays really well, it's going to be on the list.
Interesting. And then Katie, I'll just jump in with my other question. I've heard you and Michelle and other folks as well making a distinction between job openings and job ads. And we have a lot of people who are interested in, use a lot of information about job ads. And I'm wondering if you can clarify what the distinction is between those two.
Yeah, so, a few things in general that are good to know. So, certain jobs don't get posted, right? So if you think about jobs that maybe are a little more word of mouth, like in the service industry, right? They're likely to be undercounted in job ads. There are certain jobs that are likely to be overcounted too, like ones that are not place-based. So for instance, truck drivers or a lot of IT occupations, the employer is trying to hire, they will place an ad in every single county in the state, even though there's one job. So it's going to drive up, and that's not something that their deduplication algorithms take account for, right? They deduplicate across sites, but not across locations like that. So and there's lots of little quirks like that that we just learn over time. But
Okay.
I'll let Michelle, anything you want to add on that?
You're
No.
muted, Michelle.
Yeah, I mean, not all openings are out there. So that's the one selection bias. And then of course, so that's the openings versus postings. And then there's the actually employer hiring practices, which is a whole separate issue of what they do. That's different from what the postings tell us. But yeah, I think that's it.
Great, thank you.
Now we have another question. If you were to categorize low, medium, and high wage jobs by medium hourly wage, what ranges would you recommend for each category using an 1860 wage floor? This immediately went above my head, so.
So I guess I would just clarify that the $18.60 is the floor to make those lists of what the top jobs are. Like, we're not going to promote them and put them on a list of top jobs for the state if they don't pay at least that much. But it's not to say that if I were to create those categorizations, which we don't do that, but if I were to, I wouldn't, the bottom tier would not start at $18.60, right? It would expand across the whole range of wages that we have for occupations in the state. And I don't know, I mean, the researcher in me, and I will lean on Michelle here too. I mean, if I don't get to wear this hat as much as I used to, but I would say I would look to break this up equally, whether that's quintiles, quartiles, whatever you want to do, but make them equal sized groups if that's something you were interested in doing, right? So quarter your jobs in each group, maybe. I don't know, that's just off the top of my head.
Michelle might have something.
I'm just going to make one point that's sort of related to this issue about the wage rates, which is, I think, often in these conversations about how do you rank jobs and programs and talk about what's quality and what's good, and make these lists. I think one concept I've been thinking about a lot, I think, which comes up, it often is intertwined in these conversations, is we say a program is not high quality if it doesn't lead to a high quality job. And one thing possibly for colleges just to be considering too is that there's two issues here. One is the program quality and one is the job quality. And so just because early childhood education is a poorly paying field doesn't mean that a college program in early childhood education is a poor program. It's just a program in a field that doesn't pay well. So I don't know how you can separate that out when advising students, but it might be a useful thing for colleges to begin to think more about how to present information on the quality of the program versus the quality of the job. The two are intertwined, but they're different. Something I've been thinking about a lot, because I think we have a lot of difficulties with jobs that are poorly paid, but programs might still be doing good work. It's a hard question. There's no good answer, but it's a thought.
It's almost a larger issue, a social issue of value and so on, that relates to lots of other systemic issues that we experience and have been exacerbated by our current conditions. I'm going to ask Scott to stop sharing and move us into a debrief. There may be some more questions that come up, but I do have 3 colleges on the line that have agreed to give us a little insight into how they use labor market data to do strategic planning and so on their own campuses. So I will, whoops, I started sharing before I started sharing. So I'm going to go back into my screen share here, and this is meant to be fairly informal. I appreciate my colleagues from Alpena Community College, Lake Michigan College, and Lansing Community College for being willing to give us some insight into how their labor market alignment works on their campus. And just by nature of ABC order, I am going to ask my colleagues at Alpena Community College if they wouldn't mind sharing first. I gave them an open-ended prompt about just how this works, who's involved, what are the pain points, etc. and ask them each to speak for a few minutes. So President McMaster, are you going to go first or should I give it to Don?
No, I'll go first, but I'll be brief. Thank you, Katie and and Erica for the invitation. And thank you, Michelle and Scott, for the great presentations. There's some new stuff in there that'll be very helpful to us, I think, in community colleges across Michigan. We use labor market data in a lot of ways. I'll just hone in on a couple and then I'll kick it over to Dawn. For a school of our size, for instance, we've been quite successful over the last 20 years in pursuing federal grants. And we got one last week, in fact, a $2.4 million grant. Generally speaking, the data that Scott talked about, especially the Hot 500 and the careers and that sort of thing, is localized in our case in Prosperity Region 3. And it's very helpful to animate a grant proposal if you can align what you want grant funding for to what is most vibrant in the Prosperity region where you're intending to deliver the service. So this is, I want to commend Scott and his colleagues for that. That's very helpful, and we use it. Dawn uses it in particular very, very astutely. On the other end, the wage record data is a little more problematic, has been for us in the past. It may change based on the data that Scott showed. In there, say about 3 cycles ago, we made the Aspen 150. We were one of 5 community colleges in Michigan to make that. Very distinguished. We were excited about it, not complacent or about it at all. It was a huge honor. Erica did some very fine work. One of the 4 criteria had to do with wage record outcomes for the college, for your graduates. And that data was pretty difficult for us to get. And Erica helped us and the other 4 schools make the case in that criteria. And then the last Aspen cycle, we were invited to submit to the Siemens part of that. There's a Siemens competition for occupational programs. And we have one at ACC that's quite unique, a line workers program. And LCC actually has that too, and it's a good program, but we're the only 2 that have it. And the wage record, the wages of those graduates is pretty phenomenal. And, you know, for us, that's a case we would love to make. You know, we'd like to know somebody who graduated with a certificate in utility tech 5 years out, you know, how much do they make? We anecdotally know that from, you know, the graduates that stay in touch with us, that can be and often is $100,000 or more, you know, and it's fairly mind-boggling. But what we couldn't get was just, you know, take a list of all those graduates and approach someone at the state and say, can we get disaggregated data on each of these so we can aggregate it and respond, in this case, to the Aspen group and say, this is a program that has outstanding wage performance. So that said, I'm going to kick it to Dawn. She's our workforce development dean and our grant writing maestro. So Dawn, go ahead and carry it away.
Thanks, Don. I just want to echo real quickly what Don said about utilizing Erica and her help with the Aspen application, because we couldn't have done it without her help. The information that's on, for example, the Pathfinder website and a couple other locations, you know, were buried to some degree from my perspective. So I was super thankful to her for doing that. And I also like to tell you, I've been in workforce development for a really long time, not all at the college, but at the Michigan Work System as well. And thank you, Scott, for making your website so much more, user friendly, because, 20 years ago we were using LMI information, and oh my goodness, I'd have to call your office and say, hey, can you interpret this for me? Because I don't get it, because I'm not a data person. So so thank you for making that so much. That was actually going to be one of my pain points, but the website has come so far in recent years. So thanks for that. So, using labor market information and writing grants is pretty interesting, because you have to do two separate things. And as Don mentioned, that's what we've typically used labor market information for. But you're trying to show not only job perspectives, or the positive outlook of a particular occupation or group of occupations, but you also have to show, I say this tongue in cheek, but how bad your region is, right? Because you need to demonstrate that you have this need. So I'm thankful that there is a lot of data out there to be able to demonstrate where the need is, and then also where the solutions can come from. So that's typically where we use labor market data. We have an institutional researcher. She's fairly new to the organization, and she's really fantastic. Previously I was responsible for doing most of it on my own, and I'm really glad and thankful that I have her help. But definitely, another pain point or another challenge in using labor market information is from the workforce development side. We want to help our employers, right? I mean, that's our role. We want to solve their problems, want to provide what they need. So we often have to have those hard conversations about, just because you have job openings that you're having a difficult time filling doesn't necessarily mean that the region or the state has the capacity to support a full program. So that's a tough conversation that I've had to have with some employers. From workforce development, from that side, we can do some workarounds and do some short-term training, some skills building, rather than a full program. But that is another, it's a tricky piece of utilizing labor market information, but when you have the data, it's very difficult to argue, the point. So yeah, it's labor market data. I'm not a data person, like I mentioned once before. So I'm really thankful that the tools that you all have introduced have come so far over the years. One other tool that we do use is our Regional Prosperity Initiative 10-year plan. So Scott, as you mentioned, your website presents this data that is very usable and very, understandable. And you can, to some degree, regurgitate it in a way that tells your story. Our 10-year plan from the Northeast Michigan Regional Prosperity Initiative has been invaluable in that aspect as well, because they really have done a nice job painting the picture. And I'm quite sure that all regions have a similar format. So I think that's kind of it in a nutshell. Labor market information is fun to work with, but extremely challenging. So again, thanks for the tools and for having them come so far.
And thank you, Don and Don, for those remarks and the good example about how you were able to be successful using those tools and your partnerships. I keep going back to Michelle's point about relationship building being so important to this data stream issue. And I can hear you indicating that both from the structure of the state data and your relationship with those folks, and the help that the good Dr. Erica Oriens was able to provide to your college. She's always been very helpful to me as well. We have a few minutes left, and I do want to make sure that our colleagues from Lake Michigan and Lansing have the chance to share a couple of tidbits from their experience. So Ken, I don't know if you're ready to go, but perfect. There you are. Thank you, sir.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for having me. At Lake Michigan College, we use it much like Dawn and Dr. Master mentioned, starting with those relationships with our local business and industry, working with them, helping them to decide if we are going to run a program. We do have those conversations a lot. What we like about having the labor market tools is it helps with the skill building in terms of showing asking other companies to say, hey, there's some like-minded skill sets among many companies. And so we use that tool to help drive and find specific companies that might be able to partner with other companies. You know, again, we live in a smaller region. And so what happens periodically is a company will come in and say, we need two employees. And so we'll build some skill set where we'll look at their skill set value that they have, and then look at other companies that have like-minded skill sets, and then we'll look to try to build programs around multiple companies. You know, we very seldom in our region get, you know, like a bigger area, much like a Lansing, where they come in and they say, well, hey, we need 50 employees. You know, we generally have 50 companies that each need one employee. And so that's kind of how we build our programs. And so we'll use, if you're a Perkins school, you'll use it for needs assessment. We use it for program reviews. We incorporate it for helping to drive new programming when we're looking to build hard to find jobs or hard to fill jobs. What jobs are growing either by geography or demographics, salaries, demand. And again, really looking to, right now we're doing multiple program reviews this term, you know, reevaluating the specialized skill sets that are needed for each area. So really, and also then, you know, long-term strategic planning. So those are the main areas that we look at it for, but it supplements a lot of different things. We're thankful that, you know, a lot of it's driven by IR, but, you know, as a dean, I get, I play with it quite a bit to kind of really drive in some of the programming, either whether it's a program that's coming or a program that's going, you know, and we really use it as that type of tool. So thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I love hearing the relationship piece again, just continue to be refreshed in this idea of using your IR and their expertise, and then bringing your own expertise to the table as well in the workforce area. So thank you so much.
Sure.
And next, Weil McCulley from Lansing Community College is out there, I believe.
Yep, I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you, sir.
It's Will.
Will, you know what? We were texting about it and I said, do you think it's Weil or Will? So thank you. Now I know. I appreciate you being here, Will.
Yeah. So we use it. We're developing new program health metrics, and we're working hard to figure out what are the metrics. And Dr. Van Noy really hit on the piece that we're struggling with, which is there is not really good definition of what a good job is. And it can be different for different programs. I'm glad you brought up childcare, because that's a perfect example of a job where it's not very good pay. But I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody that would say that community colleges should not be providing training for this area where we need highly trained professionals. And so, you know, there are those systemic and those structural issues, but we're building scripts that we can use to set benchmarks for all programs, so that we can tell a program, if you are this kind of a program, training, hybrid, transfer, skill development, if you are this kind of program, these are the metrics by which you will be assessed. And then working with the programs, working with the deans, working with faculty to set appropriate benchmarks so that all programs are assessed on that same level. And you know, there's a lot of emotion that goes into it, and that goes past the data. That you can look at the data and say, yeah, that's right, but I don't think my program should go away. And that leads to other conversations where it all starts with those data, where it's here's what the data are. Let's try and explain those. Let's try and figure out why those data are where they are, and if there's anything we can do about it, and what our response should be. So we use the Pathfinder API to get in a lot of data to cross-reference stuff, and so I think that's really where we are. That we're using these data to try and build some of those definitions that are extremely difficult to get at.
Thank you, Will. I appreciate that. That's something that this is a newer area for me to focus on, and slicing through the jargon in this complicated landscape is definitely something that's been a learning curve for me. And today's session has been very helpful in helping dissect some of that and move forward with my own cognition. So I appreciate that. We have just a few minutes left, and I want to give you guys the chance to ask questions of one another, of our college partners that shared with us today, or of our presenters. Or if no one has questions, see, I'm filling the time, right? I'm going to give you a minute to go ahead and pop those into the chat, or feel free to unmute. I also want to draw attention, Don put a nice link into the chat that might be useful if you'd like to check it out for some additional data that is available from EDA. So feel free to check that out. And if there aren't any questions that come through, I was going to pose a final question that I'd be happy to take comments via chat or unmuting. What did you hear today that's new and different, or that maybe nudged you in a new direction for your work in this area? Is there something that anyone would like to share on that prompt?
Katie, I can go on that. Don McMaster,
Sure.
Alpena Community College. I thought the Pathfinder and the employment outcomes data was new to me. Maybe it's that dates me more than Scott and his work, but that looked very helpful, and a step in the direction that would touch on all of the areas that Michelle brought out, which are all pertinent uses of this. We didn't talk at ACC about program development and the use of data in that, but certainly data is key to that. And it's also, unfortunately, key to program closure as well. And so that was a piece that was new to me and could be very useful.
Thank you.
Katie, this is Curie Wyganic from Monroe County Community College.
Hi, Curie.
I mentioned in the chat, the LMI dashboards are awesome. I'm going to share those links with my deans, our vice president of instruction. They all know how much I'm geeked over dashboards, but Scott, thanks for presenting those. Those are really nice. And I also appreciate the examples that colleges gave regarding how they're sharing data, how they're having conversations about data. I'm the single institutional researcher at our college. I heard, I think Don mentioned, I think from Alpena, you recently hired someone in IR, and that leads me to believe you have a group of one, just like we do. So a lot of work coming out of those areas with, understaffing happening across colleges, and anything we can do to increase data literacy and just knowledge of where to access data to make these kinds of decisions or have conversations is really helpful. Thanks so much.
And thank you for sharing. I'm seeing the value of this kind of discussive sharing. And as we get further into the work, I think we'll do more of this. So more show and tell, a little bit deeper dive, and then more opportunities to talk with your peers. Anyone else want to share anything? I like to wait just long enough for you all to feel awkward in the silence so that I'm not the only one. We've got just a minute left here, and it's Friday afternoon. This has been a lot of information. I am going to need to sit and chew on this for a little while. So I just can't thank you all enough for being here with us, and to our presenters for preparing some really wonderful material for us to look through. I do have all of the slides, and I will update the website with the full slide deck this afternoon yet. The recording may take a couple of days to get up, but for those of you that wanted to share this with your colleagues, there will be a recording and all of the slides available early next week, I would assume. Erica, is there anything final that you would like to share before we say goodbye?
No, Katie, I just want to thank you for putting together an excellent session today, and especially to all of our presenters today. I think we just scratched the surface, really, and I know that so many of you just love getting access to this and learning more about it. So more to come, I think, on this from the Center for Student Success. But thank you all for doing this, and thanks for everyone to everyone for attending. As we all said, we can see the blue skies outside, and I know that's very tempting to walk out there. So Thanks for joining us, and looking forward to seeing you next month as well.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.
Bye-bye.